Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Welcome, listeners. My name is Kathy Mazak, and I am the host and creator of the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. Today, we have a really interesting guest. Her name is Karen Grace Martin, and she is the founder of a company called The Analysis Factor. Now, I think that many of you in my audience are kind of interested. Most of you are going to stay in academia, but there is definitely like a subset of you who is interested in kind of academic adjacent businesses. And a lot of you really like the behind the scenes episodes I do about my business. Karen's business is really interesting because it is a business that you might want to use yourself. And it's similar to my professional development company in the sense that she helps scholars to do better statistics. And this, I know, for all the quantitative researchers out there, including my dear husband, it's a sticking point. It's a definite sticking point. And in this conversation, you're going to hear us talk about why asking for help is important, why getting over or really rejecting this notion that we can't ask for help as academics, that is going to be so important to a flourishing career. Also, just getting this idea that asking for help can happen at any stage of the career. It is not just early career scholars who need help, especially with statistics, because guess what? Statistics change. You change. Your research changes. And so professional development, in my case, in writing and publishing, is important at every stage of the career. So is statistical support at every stage of the career. Very helpful and useful. We also dig into the difference between having a statistician as a co-author versus having a consultant statistician versus what Karen's company really does. And she also has some great freebies to give to you all by the end of this episode. So I hope you'll enjoy this conversation between myself and Karen Grace Martin. All right. Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. We have a very special guest today who I will let her introduce herself, and we're going to have an amazing conversation that is different for our podcast. But I think in the back of your mind, you are all, my dear listeners, you will be very interested in what our guest has to say. So will you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. My name is Karen Grace Martin, and I'm the founder of The Analysis Factor. And what we do is we offer statistical support and training to researchers. We have a number of programs, a number of one-on-one consulting, training programs, and membership, lots of free resources, and they're all there to help researchers do better statistics and better research.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited because my husband is an animal scientist. He always is just loving on statisticians and hoping they'll stay around him. I have this guy and he wants to go, we have a friend who came and did a master's in animal science, but then he's a statistician and he took a job in industry. And my husband was like, no, please go get a PhD and keep working with us, because he is like the statistics guy for my husband. So I think I want to start with, what kind of scholars do you work with? Like, who comes to you for help? And then we'll dig into who should come to you for help. But who comes to you for help? Yeah.
So we work with people in any sort of field that does quantitative research. So we don't narrow it to just any one specific field. So we have health researchers, PhD students in nursing, linguistics, agriculture, psychology, cover the gamut. There are a few fields that we have trouble working, like economics. They have their own language.
Yes.
But just about everyone else we work with. And they are often either in the middle of a project. So either a dissertation, a specific paper they're trying to get published. Maybe they've already submitted it and it's been rejected due to statistical concerns. Sometimes they're in the middle of planning, right? They need something in the early stages, designing. So, which we always advise people to do if they can, to come talk to us early. The earlier they talk to us, the easier we make their life later. But really, anybody who just needs help with the statistics. A lot of researchers get stuck in that statistical portion, and the expectation of journals now, and even committees for these graduate students doing their very first project. And the committees expect them to do very sophisticated statistical analyses, and they're lost.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is us not only helping them get the statistics right, but understand it well enough so that they can design the study, but also write the results, interpret, and then explain the results when they go to write it up or when they go to give a conference presentation. And a lot of it is little decisions along the way, right? Should this be in a table or a graph? How do I word this so that I'm not accidentally saying something incorrect or really explaining it? So much of it is the little decision making and the interpretations.
There's quite a few next questions I want to ask, but this is the next question I want to ask is, or the thing I want to bring up is that before we hit record, one of the things you were saying was that when you work with clients, you really offer them not just like, here's your stat, plop it in your paper, but you are offering them advice and support. So could you just talk like a little bit more about like what that looks like? Because basically what people are doing when they come to you, right, is not exactly, I want to say like outsourcing their statistics, but no, they're like collaborating with you on statistics in a way. So could you just like kind of unpack that for us?
Yes. So it's funny because among statisticians, there's a real distinction between a collaborator, a consultant, and a contractor. So everybody wants to call themselves a consultant, but not everyone is. We truly are. We are giving advice and we're making sure our clients understand. So there's a real training component to it. One of the things we talk about that our goal in working with clients is light bulb moments when suddenly it all makes sense. Not just the statistical analysis they've been struggling to understand, but their own data, like what their own results are saying. And now it makes sense to them. But a true collaborator often are academic statisticians. They want to be in from the very beginning. They care about authorship. They care about adding new statistics to the paper, which can sometimes complicate things, right?
Yeah.
And a true contractor on the other end of it is the kind of person, statistician you may go to where it's like, here's my data file. And then 2 months later, you get a report written. And you may not understand any of it. You may try to just plug it into your paper, but then it's very hard to defend.
Yeah.
So it's hard to, whether it's for a dissertation defense, whether it's with a reviewer, if you don't understand it, it's really hard to defend.
Yeah. Now I also have two different paths to go down. Let's go down this one so that we keep people listening, because again, like before we started, we were talking about kind of like who should come to you, or who do you work with, who should come to you, that kind of thing. And one of the things our conversation was sparking about was like, here's a general statement, true for you and for me. Getting help happens at every career stage. You can get help at every career stage, and you're not less than, you're not dumb, you're not any of those bad things you've been thinking about yourself if you need help. So you've talked a couple times about students dissertating and that kind of thing, but what you do is helpful and necessary for people all the way through their careers, right?
Absolutely. For a few reasons. I started out my career, my very first job, I was a statistical consultant full-time at Cornell. So I worked with undergrads up to tenured professors. And the thing that really struck me, and the classes the grad students had to take, they were getting very well trained in statistics. And yet they still got stuck. I had professors, tenured professors, Ivy League professors who were still getting stuck. And they would be so embarrassed to ask for help. So one of the things I've really learned that is hugely important is making everything as accessible as possible. I do not try to talk over people's heads. I try to make sure they understand. And two, making sure people realize everybody needs help.
Yes.
Every researcher needs statistical help. I am 100% there to support people and help them. I am not there to judge them. We have a membership program, and one of the things we do a couple times a week is live Q&As where anybody can ask any question. And I always start by emphasizing, look, ask the stupidest question you can, right? That's when you really learn. We are all here to learn. We are all here to support each other. Please ask the questions you can't ask anywhere else. You can be anonymous if you want. Your colleagues are not sitting next to you judging you. We're here to support people.
That is something that is so beautiful about businesses like ours, right? Which is like an academic adjacent business, right? Where you get to have a room full of people that you cannot, like, there's just, where else are you going to find it? Because every community that you're in academia, it's like your PhD cohort, and then it's your colleagues, and then maybe it's the people who go to your main meeting or your professional organization or whatever. But it's never just a random group of people who want to learn about statistics, or a random group of people who are trying to write and publish more. And we have the same kind of thing we get. If you're listening to this podcast and you think that people at Harvard and Yale and Berkeley and Stanford, like they all have their stuff figured out, you're wrong, because I have people from all of those places in my programs, and people from small liberal arts colleges, even community colleges, and everything in between, big public universities. Everybody needs this kind of help. And one of the other things we were saying before we hit record was how things change as your career moves on.
Yes.
I mean, I imagine especially statistics change
so fast. It's changing so quickly. And what the journals want to see is changing. So things you were doing 10 years ago don't fly anymore. Also, the other thing, which is huge, is when you take a class, when you take a statistics class, and this, again, this has become so clear to me over 20 years of working with researchers, is that what you learn in a class is knowledge. You do not learn the skills to apply that knowledge. And when you're in there with data that's messy, where it's not textbook perfect, you need to bring skills to that data analysis that you just don't get in classes. You only really get it through experience and mentoring.
Yeah, I love that. And I love too what you said about like what works 10 years ago isn't going to fly now with journals. And it's just such a good argument for why continuous professional development is
Yes,
important. And I
exactly.
think in academia, again, like these are the culture of academia ideas that are out there or stereotypes or whatever. It's like you emerge from your PhD fully formed, and
Right.
then for 30 years you do your thing, and then
Right.
you retire professor emeritus if you're lucky. But no, this is like a constant learning process. And I think a lot of people understand that, but they might not understand that that means not just going to your professional conference, but also investing in your own learning for the things that you're trying to get better at right now, which
Yep.
could be statistics, right? It could be
Right.
writing, it could be statistics. It changes as your career goes on.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
All right. So let's get into some of like those questions about writing papers with statistics in them. So one of my questions is like, what are some common statistics related reasons that people have their papers rejected?
Okay. So, as I said, a lot of times clients come to us because they had a paper rejected. So, the first thing to ask yourself is, did I actually do the statistical analysis correct? Right? Because there might be something wrong. But what I found is just as often, if not more often, the analysis is correct. But one of two things happens. Either the author did not explain it well in their result section, or they did, but the reviewer is not up on the statistics.
Oh, I love this.
Right? So
Yeah.
those are two different problems, and it can be really hard to figure out which one you've got because you can't talk to that reviewer and ask them what the problem is, right?
Right.
So we take a few different approaches, and one of the services we offer is actually called a results section review, where
Love
it's
it.
literally about the writing and how you've explained not just the methodology, but the results.
Yeah.
So making sure people are using the right terminology. Terminology is a huge problem in statistics because different fields use different terms for the same thing. It's crazy how difficult it can be to navigate. And sometimes you have to cite your terminology, find a citation to show what terminology you're using. So one is terminology, one is the right level of detail. So this is the thing. If a reviewer is confused about what you did, they're going to reject.
Yeah.
Any doubt, they just reject. So including the right amount of detail, huge difference. So terminology, correct interpretation, level of detail. And then you may have to put in a bit of an educational component to your results.
Yeah.
Or method section. Why did you choose this particular method? Why is it important to use this maybe newer method than the reviewer may have known? So a little bit of education, which is tough because you don't have much space. So a lot of citations, ideally in that journal, right? If you can find something else in that journal or in that narrow field, it can be a huge help. But even if it's not, showing these things exist in the statistical literature, in psych method, some sort of methodology related journal that is well respected, those can go a long way.
Those were some like great insider tips. Like just like rewind the episode again, because that was like real. I find right with my clients, like so many people are afraid to release their work into the world because they're afraid of the rejection.
Yes.
And then also they're afraid of the rejection because they're afraid of these things that you're talking about, right? Which is like the reviewer didn't understand. And then what do I do if the reviewer didn't understand? And you just told us what to do. So listen to that again, people. So I just think that like, this is just like a beautiful way that the writing itself, statistics and the writing itself, these things are not separate. They are very like interwoven.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the data are telling a story, right?
Yeah.
And that story should always relate back to the research question. I've developed this 14-step pathway. I call it the data analysis pathway. And it's really the steps you need to take to do any data analysis. But the very first step is really getting clear on your research question. Not just in theoretical terms, but operational. Like, how is that going to translate into a design, into the kind of variables you're collecting?
Yeah.
And then the very last step is communicating the answer to that research question.
Right.
So, how you write it up, when you use a graph, how to choose the appropriate graph or table or p-value versus confidence, whatever it is, how are you telling that story that the data told you?
Yeah. And again, this is part of like the writing process that we might learn from our advisors, we might learn from co-authors and colleagues, and also that we need to be aware of when do we need to develop this in ourselves. Again, just touching back on that idea of professional development, like so many of academics are like, well, I need to go to my professional conference because I need to be up to date in my field. And yes, you do need to be up to date in your field.
Yes.
And that's not it. Like, that's not the only thing that you need to keep up to date on.
Agreed.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, because you get to see a lot of scholars in a lot of different fields. What do you see as like kind of patterns across academics who are struggling with getting rejections? Or I'm like kind of looking for that. Like, you see a lot of people's papers. What are like the main obstacles that people have? And just in the vein of trying to normalize the processes that people go through, which involve a lot of failure and trial and error and everything. So just thinking across your client base and the lots of papers you've read, like what are people struggling with kind of universally?
So a lot of what I've seen universally is just plain old lack of statistical support, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of it comes early in the process of choosing the right analysis, given the design of the study, given the types of variables they're measuring, and that will actually answer the research question. So really early in the data analysis process, people can go off track. And very often, what they need is like a couple steps ahead or above what they're really, I don't want to say capable of doing, because with enough time and effort,
right,
I truly believe most researchers can learn a heck of a lot more, but maybe not capable in doing by the deadline they need to meet.
Right. Yeah.
So a lot of it is just knowing what's out there. Another statistician just told me there are over 800 statistical tests. He counted. There are over 800 statistical tests. So just knowing what's out there and then choosing what's the appropriate one, and then understanding the results. What is it really telling you? So the field is changing so fast. Researchers can't keep up with their own field and statistics. So that's a big thing, is just not even knowing where to start, not knowing what to choose. And then all the little decisions as you go along. Should I make this choice or that choice? Should I drop this variable? What do I do with the outliers? And some of these are very fundamental skills that they learned so many years ago, but didn't have to deal with. So who remembers that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And best practices change over time.
Right. Yes.
So things, again, even little practices like, do I drop an outlier that maybe worked 10, 15 years ago? They don't fly anymore. So that's a lot of it, is just not knowing what's out there. And what's interesting is a lot of people get their statistical training from people within their field.
Yeah.
Right? So things get narrower and narrower very often. So there might be things out there that they don't even know exist that are exactly what somebody needs.
Yeah.
So sometimes exposure to people in different fields or to like a general statistician,
Yeah.
we call ourselves primary care statisticians.
I love it.
We don't specialize.
Yeah.
We
Right.
everything, but just exposure to that to say,
Yeah.
there's this really simple thing out there. Maybe you didn't know about it. This is what all it takes.
Yeah.
So that's the big thing. It's just, you don't know what you don't know.
Again, I think it just reminds us of like the value of being in rooms with people who are not in your field. And
Yes.
who are like, you get this cross section, you see what happens across rather
Yes.
than narrowly down.
Yes.
And I think that's something that we really see. A lot of times people are thinking about our Navigate program and they're like, well, but do you work with historians? Do you work with biologists? Do you work with them? I'm like, look, what we do is we help you organize yourself and your time and get your mission straight so that you can get your writing done. That is agnostic. That is field agnostic. We work with people. And the cool thing is you get to be in the room with those other people because my program is a group program. And so you really get the benefit of seeing how these problems overlap across fields. But for you, like that, being able to help somebody in a specific field see statistics more broadly, I think is really valuable.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So anything else that you want to talk about before we wrap up our podcast today? Is there anything I forgot?
Just that, we have a ton of resources on our website. We love talking to people. We love helping researchers have those light bulb moments, and the help is out there, right? So there's no need to struggle on your own.
Yeah. So how can people find you? If they're interested in working with you, they're interested in what you do, where should we direct them?
Okay. So my website is theanalysisfactor.com, and we've set up a special page for your listeners at theanalysisfactor.com/Scholar's Voice.
Yay.
And we have a download there actually about that 14-step process. It's a checklist and guide of how to apply it. And I'll make sure we have links on that page to some of the services we've talked about and some of our free resources as well.
Awesome. Karen, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the podcast. As I say, like to my clients, all of this is writing. Figuring out all these things is writing. It's not just words on the page. It's so much more. So head on over and check out theanalysisfactor.com and get help. There's no reason. Doesn't matter your career stage. Things change.
Yeah.
Let's keep learning. Yeah.
No shame. No shame in getting better. Absolutely.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much. This was very lovely.
Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.